Go. Okay, so the training today is the training for autism leads in schools. My name is Alex Cousins and I'm the advisory teacher for autism at Cognos. Today we are going to be covering the following within our session. So I'm going to start off with talking about the role of the advisory teacher, the Cognos Autism Champions, and your role yourselves as the autism leads in schools. We're going to run through what we're going to cover over the 6 sessions this year. We're going to touch on what autism is, and then we're going to really dig deep into the strategies for supporting children with autism. So adaptations we can make to the environment, changes we can make in the way that we communicate, and assisting with the learning through offering visuals. I'll then signpost you to some high quality resources and training too. So the sessions are going to be around 1 hour each week. And ideally, I'm going to try and finish up by about 20 past, if possible, so that we can make sure that there's time for some discussion. So in terms of the autism service at Cognos, it's only made up of a small number of people. So myself, Rebecca Duffus, we're both the advisory teachers. Rebecca is on maternity leave at the moment, so I'm keeping her seat warm until her return. And we also have Asma, who is one of our autism specialists as well. So our role is to ensure that both professionals and all staff within Sutton have that really high awareness and knowledge of what autism is and how to support autistic children. Our role is also to make sure that we signpost you to additional support. Now, we've got a group of Cognos Autism Champions, and they are made up of lots of different people within the business. Some of them speech and language therapists, some of them occupational therapists, some of them work within attendance, the music service, Paving the Way, and the SEND team too. So if ever you signpost or if ever you decide to use the one-to-one sessions that we offer, the 30-minute chats with the professionals, it's often those Cognos champions that are on the line as well to assist you with, their knowledge and expertise of autism too. Next up is you guys. It's the school lead. So your role is really fundamental to sharing the expertise beyond sort of the staffing level. So it's really important that you act as that primary point of contact within your school, advising on best practice and supporting your staff with the tools that they might need, the resources they might need to support the children within their care, but also the families. So we've completed section 1. We're going to move on to section 2, all about this year's programme. So for those of you that attended last year, these are the requests that were made of the items that people wanted to be covered this year. So I've tried to group some of these into themes so that we can make sure that we get that coverage. Some of these topics will be delivered by our Cognos Autism Champions as well, so they'll be joining with some of this training. So this is kind of the intention for this year in terms of the coverage. So obviously today we've gone through what we'll be discussing. Next session will be all around supporting inclusion and autism with girls. And then moving into spring, we're going to look at adapting the environments a little bit more, moving into challenging and extreme behaviours. When we move into the summer term, we're going to be thinking about autistic identity. And I know some of you have contacted me to talk about understanding diagnosis sessions as well. And whilst they're not delivered by us, the autism leads in schools, it's the ELSAs that deliver that training. It's quite important that you understand what is being covered and how it's being delivered. We'll do some discussion into summer 1 about Autism Awareness Week, and I'll share with you lots of the stuff that goes on during that week. And finally, in summer 2, we'll be promoting independence and preparing for adulthood and life beyond the classroom. So section 2 complete, let's move on. So in terms of autism, it comes under the umbrella of neurodiversity. And it's useful to note that the term actually contrasts with the term neurotypical. And so obviously there's many brain differences in the way people's brains work, but there's no real correct or incorrect way. However, the term neurotypical suggests that's kind of an expected way of processing this information. And that's really kind of based on societal beliefs, but we've got to consider that there are a wide range of ways that people perceive and respond to the world. We've got to embrace and we've got to celebrate these, because it's actually almost 1 in 7 people that are neurodivergent. And so it's really important that we show an awareness and an understanding of the differences. So initially, the term was kind of coined back in the 90s in response to promoting acceptance of people with autism. But it doesn't, neurodiversity includes much more than just autism. It actually covers quite a few of the neurological differences, some of which you'll be able to see here in these two displays. Now, I'm going to play a video now, which I think really expresses what neurodiversity is in a much more eloquent way than I can. Please do feel free to share this video with staff and pupils within your settings, because it's a really nice starting point for conversations surrounding not only difference, but also inclusion and adaptations.
Just like our fingerprints, all our brains are unique. But for the majority of people, their brains are similar enough that there are largely no obvious differences in how they function. They have differences in things like skills, preferences, and styles. But mostly, their brains mean they perceive the world in the same way. But for others, their brains are more fundamentally different. They have differences in things like social understanding, sensory processing, communication, and information processing. These differences are a result of neurological differences such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and more. This natural variation in our brains is called neurodiversity. Those of us with no neurological conditions are neurotypical, and those of us with neurological conditions are neurodivergent. Neurodivergent people think differently. Their unique perspectives and experiences mean they can often excel at creativity and innovation, have highly specialised skill sets, and an ability to hyperfocus. If embraced, this can be a huge advantage to organisations and society. However, the differences neurodivergent people experience can make life challenging. In order to thrive at work, they often need some simple accommodations. For example, a sensory calm environment to recharge in, or a routine with the same start and end times. Approximately 1 in 7 people are neurodivergent, so not only is embracing neurodiversity critical for a truly inclusive organisation, but it also presents organisations with a huge opportunity. Just like...
Okay, so digging deeper into neurodiversity, we're actually going to just be thinking about autism. So autism is a form of neurodivergence, and it means that the brain works in a different way from other people. With regards to autism, you are born with autism, okay? And some of the signs may be noticed when a child is very young, but other signs may not be noticed until someone is a little bit older. It's important to bear in mind that if you are autistic forever, for the whole life. It's not a medical condition, there's no cure, there's no treatment required for it. But it just means that people that have autism, they just need support in different areas and with certain things. At the moment, we don't know a definitive cause for autism, or even if there is one. And one thing to notice is it's often that multiple people within a family have autism, and it's not caused by bad parenting, and it's not caused by vaccinations, it's not caused by diet, which are some of those common myths that that were kind of talked about historically. I mean, our knowledge of autism has improved greatly, and I think that awareness is much better now than ever before. But it's really important that we dispel any myths or debunk any of these suggestions that a parent is responsible for it, or a diet is responsible for it. So historically, autism has been spoken about as a triad or a triangle of impairment. And historically, three items, those being restrictive and repetitive behaviors or interests, social communication, and social interaction, have been deemed as like fundamental to a diagnosis of autism. But in recent years, there has actually been a lot more depth of research into autism, and now sensory and the prominence of anxiety have really been identified as being present for many autistic young people. I've added a link on there, which is the DSM-5 definition of autism spectrum disorder. Now, you might have caught that I said autism spectrum disorder, and that's really, really important that we really consider the language that is being used. Now, for autistic people, it's actually quite offensive and incorrect to be labeled with a disorder. That terminology is actually changing, and that's because when we say the phrase disorder, it almost suggests that someone with that diagnosis is in deficit in some way, which in many cases can be super offensive and obviously very incorrect. And so we've kind of got this two columns of ways in which we should be addressing our autistic people. What I would say is try to avoid, or at least be very wary of, the terminology on the right hand side. The way that I try to talk about autism is that we need to be thinking about the strengths that autistic people have and the challenges that they face, and consider when we're speaking about autism or autistic young people that we're thinking about the support or the level of support that is required. So to give an example, if I was going to talk about a pupil in my class, Sam, my pupil in my class, who has a diagnosis of autism, the way I would probably try to discuss him would be: Sam is autistic. He excels at answering complex mathematical problems. However, something that he finds difficult would be the reasoning element due to the social aspect. So, try to be a little bit wary about the language that you're using. The information that we have currently, based on the majority of autistic people who have expressed their voice, is that the preference would be to use the phrases autism, autistic person, neurotypical, with varying support needs, rather than that right-hand column. Although I must say, it's really difficult when you've been working in the field to adapt the way you speak. So, I mean, I even struggle with it still to this day. So my suggestion would be: ask the individual how they prefer to be referred to, and follow their lead, apologising if you don't get it right the first time. There are some more do's and don'ts here. I won't go through them all, but it's just worth having that sort of reference to come back to. It's also important to think about this historical terminology such as high and low functioning. That can really cause some difficulties, because it doesn't really express the needs for the child. So I would be very wary of using that kind of terminology around high and low functioning. It's much more helpful to talk about the individual, their challenges, and obviously their strengths, and the best ways of supporting them. Now, in terms of research around autism, historically, the voice of autistic people has kind of been left out of all kinds of research and debate, but not in Sutton and not at Cognos. Listening to the voices of young people is obviously fundamental to supporting and understanding individuals. So I'd urge you to talk to your autistic learners and find out really what works for them. This video is about 10 minutes long, so we're not going to have a chance to look at it today, but I will send the link to you. But this is a really, really lovely video that was made by Rebecca Duffus over the last year, where she asked lots of autistic individuals within Sutton to discuss their experience And it also includes clips not only from the children, but their families and other professionals in Sutton, talking about their own diagnosis. Um, so I would urge you to have a little watch of that because it's a really lovely clip. So you may have seen this phrase before. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And I think that's a really nice quote because as all people, every single person with a diagnosis of autism, every autistic person is different. And it's really important that they are treated as individuals, as we all want to be. I've added a link on here. I'd urge you to have a look. This is Dr. Stephen Mark Shaw, who talks about his own experience of being diagnosed. I like this more child-friendly analogy too. Just introducing that difference is absolutely okay. So people with autism are a bit like pens, and people without autism are a bit like pencils. Being autistic can be like a pen in a class of pencils. People with autism are different to people without autism, and it's okay to be different. Now, as I said before, autism is defined by various different characteristics, one of which being social interactions. So the list that I've popped on that slide there just explains some of the more common difficulties that some autistic people have. So often there are difficulties within friendships and understanding or reading social cues or reading facial expressions and intentions can be really, really, really difficult. Um, Knowing what is socially acceptable or what is inappropriate in different contexts can be really tricky. Um, a lot of our autistic people want to spend time on their own, but in doing so, they also can still feel quite lonely. So often it's really important that we support our autistic people to develop those friendship skills, develop those social skills that many of us take for granted. In terms of social communication, again, here's another list of difficulties that many autistic people struggle with. It's not to say that all autistic people struggle with these things, but these are just a list of some of the difficulties that can be experienced. I mean, as humans, we do communicate in different forms. It's not all verbal. Often it is those, little cues or the way that we show our facial expressions or with our body language. And often it is the case that those with autism can really find that kind of communication element a little bit more difficult, or it can be a little bit more challenging to read or process that kind of communication. So often it means that idioms or unusual phrases can be taken quite literally at times. So it's really important that we say exactly what we mean, that we don't skirt around issues. We don't just hint on things. Sometimes it's really important to be very, very clear at exactly what we mean to ensure that the communication is clear and accessible. So autism can also be defined or understood by restrictive or repetitive behaviours or interests. Again, there's a list on there of some of the things you may notice with your young autistic people. So for some, especially our high school girls, we see a lot of this real attention to detail and perfectionism, and it can be really detrimental to their well-being because of this real need to make sure that everything is spot on and perfect. Again, this is not all individuals with with a diagnosis of autism, but we've got to bear in mind that even if a autistic person is highly intelligent, even if they are able to access lots academically, there are still difficulties that may be masked or hidden, or there may be difficulties that kind of fly under the radar a little bit. So it's really important that we're aware of, those challenges that we may not be seeing. They may not be very obvious, but they are known to be, quite tricky for autistic people. So sensory or sensory overload would is another thing that really can define someone's autistic experience. So that overload is experienced when the sight, smell, taste, touch, sound, or even the balance, interoception, or body awareness is overwhelming. So what happens in these instances is more information is taken on than a brain can process, and that can often cause this real feeling of overwhelm, where the brain just cannot respond in the moment, and it kind of responds in a more fight, flight, or freeze mode. And often in those instances, we or artistic people um, try to either avoid those sensitivities, or they are oversensitive to those things, or they are undersensitive to those kind of sensory inputs. Now, in one of our spring sessions, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about sensory, and I'll ask for one of our occupational therapists to join us to go into these things in a bit more detail, because although it is a huge part of how an autistic person experiences the world, it can be very specific to individuals. And if you do have any children with an OT package, my suggestion would be do have a chat with their OT about how to support them with their sensory needs. In terms of identifying that sensory overwhelm, it may look like any of these things on here. So it could be a child blocking their ears with their hands. It could be restlessness. It could be crying or fidgeting. It could be fear. It could be outbursts. It could be just shutting down and not communicating at all. And obviously, it looks different in all children. So, really be vigilant and work out, is this behavior a response to sensory overload? I think often in the mainstream classroom, there's often as teachers, we looking in terms of behavior and negative behaviors that upset the rest of the classroom. I think it's really important that we're looking at our autistic learners as individuals and thinking, if they're behaving in a way that looks different, there's probably a very good reason for that behavior. So just, really try and tune in. Now, autism can be very overwhelming. I really like this image here of this autism and overwhelm bucket. In some cases, the same activity can cause, a big reaction, but this may not happen all the time. So in just looking at this image of the overwhelm bucket, lots is going in all of the time. However, there are things that reduce the stress and overwhelm. So do bear in mind that, each individual reacts to different stimuli, and things are adding and adding to the bucket. However, there is a way of reducing that overwhelm, and that's something that we really want to encourage children to be really independent with. So have a think about the children that you work with, and consider the strategies that they currently use. Are there any strategies that you think you might want to try with your pupils? If you'd like to use the group chat function now, or if you'd like to unmute yourselves and tell us all about any of the strategies that are working for you, now would be a really nice time to have a little chat. Is anyone feeling brave? I'm going to stop the share for a moment. See if anyone would like to join and share their experiences.
I will just briefly.
Thanks, Carla.
I've come from primary school, early years, recently moved into high school. So the resources that I'd used before, not all of them, but most of them are not really going to work in a high school setting. So this is where I struggle with.
Yeah.
The fidgets still work, the weighted blankets if it's appropriate in a one-to-one session, but in terms of a classroom, I'm interested to hear what people say.
Would anybody else like to make some suggestions for Carla and what strategies work better in the high school classroom rather than the early years or primary settings? I see James has said that they've got a quiet space in a classroom that students are able to go to when they're feeling overwhelmed. We've got an update. Breathing and distraction techniques, I completely agree. Seating away from the windows and doors to minimize noise and distractions. Absolutely, completely agree. All of those work very, very well. I can also, Carla, signpost some bits to you personally or send some bits out to the rest of the group of specific targeted things that work better for secondary pupils, because I completely agree. Working in early years, you have lots of colourful, beautiful looking visuals. And as children progress through primary school, these things do feel maybe a little bit immature, or they've used them for so long that no, they don't any longer serve that function anymore. So no, I completely agree with that. And let me send you some bits over. If anyone else in the group has any physical um, strategies that work, any visuals, anything that's more specific to high school students, please send to me. I will forward to the rest of the group, because there's no point in one person not sharing their great practice. Or if you've created a resource that's really beneficial, please do share it with myself, and I will deliver it out to the rest of the team. I think a lot of teacher and support assistant time is spent in creating these lovely resources, but if we pulled them all together, it might be even more helpful for everybody. So we'll keep going. Thank you for that, Carla. So movement breaks can, of course, be extremely helpful to support with regulation. What I would suggest is movement breaks can feel a little bit chaotic in the secondary classroom. Obviously, a lot of us as teachers want to encourage children to get on with some of the work, and a lot of that work, as topics and subjects get a little bit more complex, does involve a lot more focused time. What I would say is encourage pupils to consider how they're feeling in that moment. Are they feeling dysregulated? Are they feeling wobbly? Use the zones of regulation kind of strategies if you've embedded that within your settings. I think that's a really nice way of supporting people to recognize how they feel, and then consider what strategies are supportive but equally appropriate in those instances. Um, I wouldn't suggest crab walking around the classroom, and just like Carla said, it just doesn't fit right necessarily within that secondary classroom. But like I think it was James that commented, sometimes having that breakout space where the individuals can do these big body breaks or use these tools can be really beneficial. Just consider how long it takes for that individual to calm down, and whether that additional transition is helpful in that instance. Finally, before kind of incorporating those kind of strategies, just make sure the individual is aware of what's going to happen once they've completed it. What is the expectation? Are they getting on with their learning once they're calm and regulated? Are they expected to transition? We're going to watch a short clip about anxiety. Everyone has feelings of anxiety at some point in their life. Most people feel worry. Most people feel anxiety. For example, if they're going into an exam or if they're having a job interview. And anxiety can look different for different people. So it's important to kind of think about the kind of signs that indicate a child or a pupil is anxious. So it could be that they're a little bit restless. It could be that they're complaining of a stomach ache. It might be that the heart's beating fast and they're in that fight or flight mode. They might be profusely sweating or having a hot flush. It could be that they tell you they feel sick, or they've told you that they're not sleeping well, or you might have even heard them suggest that they've had a panic attack. And obviously all of these things are really uncomfortable for children, but anxiety is a common emotion. It's just really important that we really understand how it presents itself for our individuals. And what's really supportive for them. Now, I won't play this video because I'm quite conscious that I want to kind of stop in the next 10 minutes so that we've got a little bit of time for discussion afterwards. I'm going to skip past this, but I would urge you when I send out this information to watch back at some of these clips. So in terms of what might make autistic people feel anxious, have a little think about what that might be. And if you're happy to unmute yourselves, that would be really helpful here to suggest what are those common causes of anxiety for secondary school pupils.
The unknown, I would say, quite often if they can't predict what's going to happen, that can be quite anxiety inducing.
I completely agree. Yeah, the unknown is terrifying for many of our children, autistic or not. Thank you.
Last minute timetable changes or teacher changes.
Yeah, I completely agree. A lot of us struggle with change, but for children who obviously lack a lot of control in their daily lives, it's really important to think about that. Again, thank you, James. You've put noise, that lack of understanding. I agree. Teachers' behaviour as well, and those non-verbal cues. If that's your microphone, would you turn that on to mute, please? Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, unstructured time such as break time. Yeah, for many of our children, it's those transitions or those times where it's not always clear exactly what children should be doing. I completely agree. Yeah, unclear instructions. If we haven't delivered a message in a way that's been received, it can really cause uncertainty. Yeah, again, trips or any like big changes where children don't feel prepared. That can really cause that anxiety. Yep, canteen assemblies. And bear in mind, in lots of these things that you've suggested, there's a lot of sensory overload going on there. I mean, I'm thinking the canteen or the assembly, you've got a huge volume of young people in one space, eating and drinking lots of unfamiliar or smelly foods and drinks. Often it's not clear where people should be. And so there's a lot of bumping into each other. Fire drills can cause severe anxiety. I've known many children to have, that real extreme reaction when it comes to fire alarms. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, the thought of inadvertently saying the wrong thing. I think that's so common and so underestimated in how often those things are happening. And just because we're not always in earshot of those things, or we don't necessarily see children experiencing those emotions in the moment, yeah, we need to be very aware that deep down in these children's stomachs, sometimes they just can't do right for doing wrong, and even if they're trying their best, they still don't feel like they're fitting in. Fear of making mistakes. Yeah, don't like to draw attention to themselves. Fantastic. Misreading social situations. Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Completely agree. There's just so many causes of anxiety, and I would even add in there the exam pressure and the exam stress and that need for, success within this setting and beyond. Thank you. I won't play this video, but there are a huge number of sensory triggers within this clip, so I would urge you to, have a watch of it or play it with your learners and see if they can spot any of those triggers that really stand out as anxiety causing. I'm going to skip this one as well, just because I'm really conscious of time. Again, I will send this clip to you. This is a young man called Christopher, and it's a clip from Educating Manchester. So some of you may have seen this already, but this is a child who is clearly very successful within the school environment. However, mainstream can be really tough for him. And I would urge you to watch a little bit of that at some point. So in terms of sensory and anxiety, we really need to be sure that we understand what is triggering those things. We need to be thinking about adapting that environment to make it work for the individual. And we need to be thinking about creating, visuals that can really help to reduce that anxiety. The monitoring and managing energy levels, self-soothing, relaxation, calming activities, and those apps as well as counseling and therapy can all work for the individual too, but that's kind of something that the individual might want to try themselves. So moving on to the strategies for supporting children, or in this case, young adults, really. So again, please refer back to the chat and let me know what difficulties a child with autism might face in these environments. So we've got like an early years classroom here, we've got a corridor setting here, and then we've got a classroom just there. So if you could just pop something in the chat, what is it that a child or a young adult with autism might face in those environments? Let's have a look at the chat. Oh, please feel free to shout out as well. Audio and visual overload. Thank you, James. Completely agree. Feeling of overwhelm. Busy and noisy. Absolutely. We've got individuals bumping into each other and breathing on each other, talking, so much going on. Lack of structure. No clear seats. No clear paths to walk along. Noise, smells, crowds. Busy, messy. Some of the research that I did for my recent dissertation was all about these images and the feeling of overwhelm and distress that was felt by many of the children just by looking at pictures such as these. It's so important that we make those adaptations to the environment to support for our young people. Yes, Carla, sitting cross-legged. For many of our children, it is incredibly uncomfortable to sit on the carpet or sit on the floor. We've really got to be taking into consideration that can be so uncomfortable for an individual that they may not even be able to focus on the learning because of that discomfort. Right, we'll stop there. We're just going to carry on with talking through adaptations to the environment that we could use. So it's really useful, and some of you have already said this already, but have that quiet space within the classroom if possible, or in the wider school environment that is away from crowds, where a reduction of noise can take place, where lighting can be reduced, so that an autistic person and a friend or a companion can retreat to if everything becomes a little bit too much. This should be like a really safe space that autistic pupils are aware of, that is clearly signposted. This is a small adaptation that can make a huge difference to the experience of an autistic person. Inside that area, having some soft seating, having some sensory fidgets, having something to reduce stress. I quite like things, I mean, this is a bit dated, but a Walkman or a stereo or some kind of music that would allow the child to play what they want to play and do that on their own or separate from everybody else, to really try and dull down the noise of and the stresses of everything else. Equally, we want to be thinking about reducing that brightness or having tools like sunglasses available. The overwhelm from the brightness can, like I said before, really prevent a young person from being able to focus on what it is that you're trying to deliver. So be mindful of adapting those environments, pack away anything off the sides, declutter. If it's not needed for that session, it could really do with being put away, out of sight. If it's out of sight, it may well be out of mind for our young people. Really consider if music is necessary or if loudspeaking is necessary throughout each of the lessons. Encourage that turn taking so that our autistic people can tune into what is being said by the individual one at a time. If you can preempt people and let them know when there is going to be a fire alarm or loud music, that's really beneficial too. And consider just allowing our autistic people to transition during quieter times. That can really aid, a really successful movement from one session to another. So I really like this analogy. There are many things, many great things about each of those consoles. However, they're not very easily able to communicate with each other, and some things can't be easily translated. This is true for all people, to be fair, but we need to be thinking about finding a way that works for all pupils. And bear in mind that there are very few strategies that are used to support an autistic learner that are actually detrimental to any neurotypical learners. In fact, having those visuals can actually be really beneficial. So in terms of communication, have a little look at these suggestions here. So think about reducing the verbal input when you're talking to a child. Use just keywords or chunks of information. Make sure you're using their name to ensure that you have their attention. Give processing time. So give an instruction or say your sentence and then stop and wait. And keep waiting, because a child will respond to you when they're ready and when the information has been processed. I think we're very quick, I certainly am, to come back with additional information or rephrase it very quickly. Actually, sometimes a person is just needing a little bit of additional processing time. It's important that we're clear and that we explain. Just say what it is that we mean. Use that positive language to say what we want pupils to do, rather than saying what we don't want them to do. Often our autistic learners hear the verb, and that verb, if it's a negative, for example, don't run, they may only hear run. And that's the opposite of what you would like them to do, perhaps in the corridor. So just be mindful of that. Double check for understanding. There's no harm once you've given the instruction in asking, do you understand what I've said? Can you repeat back to me the instruction or something alike? And if possible, give choices. Like I mentioned earlier, children don't have a lot of control. If there is a way of giving a choice, so I want you to do these two pieces of work. Do you want to do this one first or this one? It's quite a nice way of giving back that control. I think that's quite a nice quote there as well. Many pupils with autism do find it difficult to interpret and understand information from more than one sense at a time. And sometimes this might mean that a child can't look and listen. One thing to just bear in mind is really consider, does eye contact mean learning? And if I think about my own experience, I do some of my best learning when I'm driving in my car and I'm listening to a podcast and information goes in, but I'm not looking at the podcast. I'm not reading anything. I'm just listening. I do it while I'm driving. So just bear in mind that just because a child is not looking at you does not mean that the information is not being processed. So try not to enforce things like eye contact. I'm going to skip through the next few slides quite quickly because I do want to answer any questions that you might have. And I will send all these slides to you all. But indirect praise can be really helpful. Reward and punishment don't tend to work. So the best thing we can do is stay calm, stay in control, and reward the efforts as well. Share the knowledge that we have. So if we know a lot about a child, ensure that everybody else that comes into contact with that child has that important information as well. You know, what are their strengths? What helps them to regulate? How do they like to be addressed? What supports them when they are feeling anxious or overwhelmed? And consider how visuals can help to share messages for all people. So we do use them every day. We do know that autistic people benefit from clear visuals, and therefore making some adaptations to our instructions or the way that we share information can really enable it to be more accessible and definitely more digestible. So they allow the individual to hold that thought through seeing that visual. Sometimes that can help to reduce anxiety. A visual can set an expectation or a boundary. I'm going to some of the next few slides will show you different ways to do that, and many of those, Carla, are specific to secondary. It allows us to break those tasks into manageable chunks, and it gives the adult, the support staff, or the teacher a point of reference. which fundamentally promotes that independence for that individual. Now, the visuals will look very different depending on the individual. They do help with processing, they do help with managing day-to-day tasks, they help to minimize that feeling of overwhelm and anxiety. They tell the individual what's happening now and what's happening next, and it can be used to tick things off as well, so that, you know, there's that countdown to completion. There's some suggestions here. These are a little bit more simplistic, but if your individuals need a visual timetable, create something that works for them. You know, personalize it, make sure it's got the information that they really need. So anything that really causes that anxiety, make sure that's, you know, laid out for them and the details there. Again, some more examples. Again, I'll send these all to you. Pick what works for the individuals that you work with, and a reward system is also really helpful. Social stories and calendars can really benefit with reducing that anxiety, especially with things like trips that we mentioned earlier, and that fear of the unknown. So, you know, laying out what is going to happen on that day or over the school holidays can actually be quite helpful too. The use of visuals like timers to represent how long until the end of the exam or how long until the end of this task can be very helpful. There's a lovely video here on how a secondary school teacher kind of breaks down the sequence of a session. So it's definitely worth having a watch of that. But like I said, time is of the essence, and we're running out of it. So I'll speed through this one. But I'd urge you to go back. This is lovely as well. It's definitely worth watching this clip on TED Talks, and it's Temple Grandin, who is a very famous autistic person who talks about her experience of the world and how she sees language as pictures. So lots of you have been in contact with me with regards to what support is available from Cognos. And so moving forward, I thought it would be really helpful to give you some of that information. So Cognos offers a lot of support which is completely free, and I'll send these links to you. Basically, we have an autism support map which gives lots of information just for parents and for families. We offer monthly surgeries for them, and we offer termly workshops. So please signpost your parents and families to those services. Our school staff and our school professionals, we obviously offer a support map as well. We've got those half-termly surgeries as well. We have CPD workshops, so this one obviously is one of them. And if any of you are also ELSAs, we've got some drop-in sessions coming up for those of you who have already got that course under your belt. There is also some new ELSA courses coming up starting next month. Finally, we've got some Cognos YouTube. We have a Cognos YouTube channel which has got some really lovely videos that you can share amongst your staff team for various different topics. We've got a traded offer as well. So if we haven't offered you everything that you require in the commissioned offer, that there is quite a lot more that we can do. Obviously, this comes at an additional cost. We've just about finished. So in summary, we've gone over the roles of the autism leads in schools. We've talked about the autism champions, and I've talked about my role as the lead teacher for autism at Cognos. We've talked a little bit about the programme overview and what to expect over the course of the year. We've defined the characteristics of autism, and we've gone over some of the strategies that I hope have been helpful for you. I'd encourage you all to share with your colleagues what you've learned or what's been refreshed in your mind for today. And I'm now going to stop the recording. So if any of you have got any questions or want to add anything, we can do that now. Thanks for joining.
Hey, sorry, I've got a question actually.
Please, I'm just going to check. I don't know if any of you heard that the recording had stopped. Don't think it did.